This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com.
Oh, it's too warm for me. Oh, it's warm. I like it warm, but I don't like it this warm. It's too warm. You know, there's warm and there's warm. It's called summer. Have a saloon and shut up.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, a podcast that keeps things cool when the issue is heated and adds human warmth when the world feels cold. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. Our aim is to take the heat but not the light out of the things that affect our lives and to give you plenty of actions to take.
Because it's only through collective and persistent action that we can change the world for the better.
So put your phone on Do Not Disturb, settle down somewhere shady, and help us begin another Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
And bringing up the rear as ever, I'm producer Kenny, here to remind all you gorgeous listeners to sign up to back us at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod, which will give you access to our private Discord channel and the chance to join our editorial meetings every quarter, and all for the price of an iced Americano, which we all need desperately in this heat.
This week, as the government faces another wall of hostile headlines about asylum seeker numbers, Reform UK appears to endorse vigilantism as the solution, leading to a host of illiberal measures designed to make the Home Office look tough.
And we spill the trade secrets of the deals of the EU, India and America. Plus, we're going to talk about whether the EU's deal with the USA proves Brexit was, after all, worth it.
To help us making his very welcome return to the show, it's trade expert David Henig. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
David, as you know, I'm a keen record collector, and you've got a pretty hefty collection yourself. If your house was on fire and you had time only to save 5 records, which ones are you rescuing and why?
Please don't give my family any ideas, first of all. Secondly, look, for me, I listen to music constantly. But I think the reason I collect is that each, in fact, it's CDs in my case rather than records. Each CD has a story behind it, where I bought it, something feelings to do with it. And I was pulling out one earlier. It was just a compilation of recordings made in my hometown of Lancaster. And this arose because somebody contacted me on Twitter a couple of years ago and said, "Would you be interested in buying this? It's for charity." So I have both the memories of how it came about, but it takes me back to my childhood. I knew one or two of these bands. Most of them I didn't. That's slightly before my time. And so it's that evocative feeling that means that I want to have things to hand. And there are other CDs with other stories, but this one was called When We Were Young. So even the title takes us back, but it also reflects the current moment because these people wouldn't have got in touch with me if it weren't for social media and the fact that I post a lot about my hometown, Lancaster.
And we must never ask Alex this question because I'm sure his answer will be, I'm going down with my records. I will burn to a cinder with the lot.
No, they're just things. Come on. I love them, and they've taken me 35 years to collect, but they are just things. I don't think I would take any, to be honest. Why would I want a sad reminder of all the years that are now lost and I can never replace? The problem with this stuff is that there's so much that just isn't out there anymore. It's not like you could claim the insurance and go out and rebuy it. A lot of it is radio transcriptions and one-off things. I had a famous soprano contact me a couple of months ago asking me for a copy of a radio recital she did on the BBC because she doesn't have it in her archive. So I don't think I would save anything. It would just be too painful a reminder.
Kenny, I assume you'll grab the cat and your partner. Anything else in your prized possession that you'd grab before you went?
Well, the one thing that I won't take is my records and CDs because my record collection was pinched. Then when I started building it up, I moved house, and my favourite ones got left in a car on a hot day, and they melted.
Oh,
They all become,
no.
wow. So it's stuff that I moved to CDs, which I very much liked. They were stolen twice as well. So the second time, the insurance company said, look, it's fine. How many have been stolen? And it was getting on for 1,000. It was a huge number. And I said, do you want a list of them all so that you know what I'm going to need to replace? I could hear them shaking their heads. Mate, just buy what you
Please
want.
don't.
Send us the receipts. That's right. And I tell you what, going into record shops or even going online and trying to buy hundreds of albums, blooming difficult. I couldn't do it. I ended up buying sort of multiples of the same band, and then 6 months later regretting it. So yeah. I'm a huge fan of the streaming world, which means that my music will come out of the blaze along with my partner, Ibex, and the cat, and my phone. I'm sorted.
Having failed so far to fan the Epping protest into spreading, Reform UK seems to be trying an alternative theory of arson, creating the potential for many small fires. After a month of bleating about lawless Britain, their solution seems to be more lawlessness. But this is a good lawlessness, you understand, because it's their lawlessness. Let's have a listen to what Dick Tice had to say.
Men protecting women is it's a normal, sensible, good thing in the United Kingdom. We've got centuries of doing the same. It's the gentlemanly thing to do. And the police have become so distracted pursuing online tweets and other unnecessary things that people are being left to their own devices. And that involves essentially sort of setting up their own sort of versions of Neighbourhood Watch with a slightly more focus on specific safety. The use of citizens' arrest where there are no police there or could be there in the immediate future. So, yes, stay the right side of the law, but it's actually part of our neighbourly duty to protect our own. Law-abiding citizens are furious about what is going on and the significant preponderance of sexual catcalling, harassment, leering, sneering, jeering near a number of these asylum seeker hotels. That is the harsh reality.
Labour, meanwhile, is facing more terrible headlines as undocumented asylum seekers continue to cross the channel, and has responded by asking for more time and announcing a slew of measures, including more foreign criminals to be deported more quickly and telling police that they can reveal a suspect's ethnicity in certain cases, evidently still confident that they can somehow out-Farage Farage. In a country with galloping demographic decline, it is pretty striking that so few in positions of leadership seem to be discussing the trade-offs that come with a shrinking group of working-age adults. So we thought we might. Naomi, first off, would you feel safer knowing that your local gentlemanly chapter of Reform was patrolling your neighbourhood?
I'll tell you what, in my local area, I have seen quite a few women of a certain age, i.e. older than me, marching around with put Farage in charge jumpers on. So they specifically definitely don't
Is that real?
feel
Is
safe.
that a thing that
And,
happens?
yeah, they on a Saturday, I've seen them marching around, accosting anyone who will, give them the time of day to talk about why he needs to be prime minister. But getting back to this Tice piece and the constant right-wing rhetoric around protecting women, well, let's look at some of the facts around it. Okay, we now know that almost half of the people arrested during the race-related riots in Belfast last year had previously been reported to police for domestic abuse. 23 out of 48.
Wow.
And this rhetoric of protecting women is just a way for white supremacist men to deflect attention away from their own misogyny, from their violence against women and children. And too often the words protecting women get used as a tool of oppression because the racialized image of a sexual predator just maintains white supremacy theories and make it much easier for them as white men to get away with assaulting women. But it isn't even just a tool to spread racism. Trans women in particular are being demonized as predators in the name of protecting women as well. Often they're accused of this by women who call themselves feminist. And then when you throw a third issue into the mix, sex workers, who are often women and are continuously dehumanized and disregarded in the name of protected women, means that you've got a result that all of this makes women less safe. Some women might gain power from it, but in aggregate, as a group, it makes all women less safe. And I have never seen Tice behaving in a so-called gentlemanly way to protect women or anyone. I have seen him in person humiliating and degrading asylum seekers outside a hotel in my area, camera in hand, later selectively editing their answers to stitch together a piece of hate propaganda to further his own cause, in this case being Islamophobia. Of course, I don't feel safer. In fact, I feel inordinately less safe.
Obviously, there's a huge amount of hypocrisy going on here, knowing Farage has characterized people like Andrew Tate as a very important influence on young men, and the treatment of the Reform UK MP that was actually convicted for domestic violence in his youth, and all of them coming out to the media to say, this is a Christian country, we believe in forgiveness, he's done his time, forget about it. So there is an obvious hypocrisy there, but it's also weirdly consistent, because as I watched Sarah Pochin, their MP, she kept saying, and the emphasis is quite interesting, she kept saying, no wonder men are forming groups to protect their daughters, to protect their wives. The emphasis was very much on their.
And it's no wonder that we're now hearing about groups of concerned British men mobilising themselves into guardian angel style street patrols out there to protect their daughters, their girlfriends, their wives, even their mothers.
So actually, if it all flows from seeing white women as your property,
Absolutely.
You don't want them in some way sullied by some foreigner, it actually makes perfect sense that suddenly they would be all gallant and medieval.
Yes, of course. It is all about the subjugation of women and who gets to subjugate them. What they're essentially doing is giving a green light to vigilantism.
Yeah.
Yep. And I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and there were so many no-go zones for the police, and paramilitary groups would police, quote unquote, their own areas. And I can assure you, it is not in the interests of the community. It is in the interests of furthering their own sectarian ideology, division, hatred, and a small group of violent men end up lining their own pockets by running protection rackets. That is the extension of whipping up vigilantism in this country. We've seen it before, and this will lead to us seeing it again. And it is completely and wholly unacceptable. But what they're doing is trying to create this sense that Britain is now so broken that the police won't do their jobs or can't do their jobs. There is also a lot of misogynistic content being pushed out by these very same men that do the protecting women stuff on social media, calling out women police officers for failing to do the job as well as a man would do. There are YouTube channels where ex-police officers, ex-prison officers get interviewed talking about, I had maximum respect for my female colleagues, but, in a combat situation or, in a situation where there was a riot kicking off on the wing, they were useless, or, they'd go flying as soon as anybody backed them. They show videos of women with battering rams trying to do a dawn raid on a drug dealer's property, failing to be able to open a door. And of course, men do too. Men fail at it as well. But all of it is around the weaker sex, the dominant sex. The weaker sex need protecting. The weaker sex shouldn't be doing the jobs that they are doing. In fact, they should be home. Great replacement theory stuff. White people should be having more babies. It is all loaded in misogyny. And that is where we're headed. And the amount of that content everywhere is staggering once you start looking for it.
And I'm just certain that the net result, and probably what they want, is that you will see these groups of people, even the ones that move from good motives, they will misidentify someone because, of course, it all hangs on whether someone looks like an asylum seeker, and it will end up resulting in some sort of violence, or it will end up making those communities feel so unsafe that they end up putting together their neighborhood watch groups to fight back, to protect their mosque or, whatever. David, hostility to immigration is plainly increasing But the demographic facts are pretty merciless. The median age in the UK was just over 37 in 2000. It's just under 41 today and will be about 45 by 2050. On top of that, the birth rate at the moment is at 1.4, one of the lowest levels we've had. And the minimum, as I understand it, just to tread water in terms of population size, is considered to be 2.1. So what does the economy look like if the political prevails over the economic and we're looking at a shrinking working population in this country?
Well, indeed, population decline, or demographic decline as it can be called, is terrible for economic growth in general. Now, you're talking about if the political wins over the economic. Of course, there is an alternate here, which is that we actually have a narrative that discusses the real issues around immigration, around population decline, which clearly, from what you're saying, we don't have. But that is a problem here. One of the interesting parts of the rise of the ageing population and reform, and the Conservatives are becoming much more pro-intervention by the public sector, in part because they are looking to protect spending on the elderly. But of course, if you're spending on the elderly, then that's where most of the public spending is going, and less is going on creating opportunities at younger ages. But in broad terms, all of this is very bad for the economy. Already, our economy actually relies on immigrants. We know that from the NHS, but actually we know that from a lot of growth industries. We know that immigrants have more energy to be starting up businesses. That's historically the case in the US, but it is also in the UK and many other countries. People who want to travel also have the energy. They want to start up new businesses. They want to contribute and develop their economy. And somehow all of that is lost. You're in danger of getting basically a sclerotic economy because of an aging and closed population. That's obviously terrible for the economy, but that's the road we're going down unless people start to be making the case for why immigration is actually a good thing economically and a good thing politically and for society. So I can't just make the economic case. I think we learned over several years that won't go anywhere.
It's not even part of the debate. It's not that no one is making that alternative argument. I mean, I watched a debate, let's call it a debate, on Newsnight last week, and Andy Haldane was a part of it. Now, he's not an idiot. He knows his onions, and yet he sat there saying, the solution to the country's problems is to train our young people rather than import labor. That is obviously part of the solution, to give better skills to our population. But it's not the whole solution, because we're not running out of skills. We're running out of young people. That's the point. So saying let's train our young people better is just to completely ignore the numbers.
Well, it's not an either or, and that's really important to be saying here. You have this fallacy that there's a set number of jobs, and if immigrants are coming in, taking in our jobs, that means young people from this country have fewer opportunities, which is simply not true. If more people are creating businesses, then more young people will have opportunities. And it's a different kind of motivation for people in many cases. So many of the people who want to start businesses, they want to make their way, often are immigrants. It's all about creating an overall dynamic economy. And essentially, you're talking your way, and this is this immigration story is part of talking your way into decline. And there's a big danger at the moment, I think, more broadly. In the UK, it's not just in the UK, it's in other countries as well, that we're talking our way into economic decline, that the West has nothing more really to offer the world. Well, it's just nonsense, really. So I do find it annoying. I'm not surprised by the Reform Party saying this sort of thing. I do find it rather surprising, rather worrying that what you may call more mainstream parties are not making a case for something different and something better. And I think that is a large part of our problem at the moment.
Quiet Riot. Now, this is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Thanks to them for sponsoring today's show. If there's something that's not in short supply these days, it's opinions and advice. Heck, it's what this show majors in. Who should I vote for? What coffee maker should I use? How do I stop AI taking my job away? It can all be a bit overwhelming, And if you're looking for advice on something as serious as mental health, it really is important to find advice you can really trust. Poor mental health can be utterly debilitating, and getting trustworthy support is, I think, the essential first step in trying to turn things around, whether you've experienced major trauma or are just struggling a bit with life's daily challenges. So, how do you cut through all the noise? Well, that brings us to BetterHelp, which, as well as having more than 5,000 therapists in the UK, is also the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people. It's popular, an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 tells its own story, and BetterHelp makes it incredibly easy to fit therapy into your busy life. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/quietriot. That's betterhelp.com/quietriot.
The thing that is agitating people is this loss of control because of the undocumented migrants using unsafe passage like small boats to get here with, as we all know, the vast majority of migration in the UK is not coming from those seeking refuge here. It is people coming to work on visas, in our NHS, in our social care system, in our businesses, etc. And it all fundamentally comes back to the fact that we've had economic stagnation. We've had a Brexit that has exacerbated all of these issues, both in terms of our inability to return those seeking asylum without documentation and to attract the talent that once was able to travel under freedom of movement to take up the jobs that are so desperately needed within our country. So compounding all of that, people are feeling worse off. They are worse off. It's not just that they feel it. Their purchasing power has gone down. All of their costs have gone up. And so they're looking for people to blame. Enter from hard right onto the stage people like Farage and Tice, giving them an excuse to punch down rather than up at those that have caused this mess in the first place.
Are there any other solutions, like magical future stuff, that might dramatically reduce, I guess, the number of working age people we need, like AI or robotics and tech in general, or to increase the retirement age significantly? Would the UK population wear an increase of the retirement age to 75 more easily than migration?
Look, David will have more to say on this as well, I'm sure. Broadly, when we look at, and this is skewed across the country, and Kenny will tell you that, Scotland doesn't have the same life expectancy as parts of England do, and certainly in the south of England, but broadly people are living to their mid-80s. But where the big difference is in the quality of life you're able to have in the last 20 years. We are not just an aging population, we are an increasingly unwell population with it. That, of course, is in no small part thanks to Johnson's mishandling of the pandemic, but also wealth and the lack of it has a really big factor to play in it as well. Poor housing, longer NHS waiting lists, less money to nourish your body, etc. So you can increase the retirement age, but it doesn't mean that you're going to increase the number of people well enough to keep working to that age. And it feeds into the social contract being broken. If you've paid your national insurance contributions on the assumption that your retirement age would be X and then it keeps getting moved to Y, Z, etc., you're going to feed into that sense of what is the point? What do I owe this country when this country has not given me what I was promised it would? You have, of course, got things like AI reducing the population that we would need to be working. But unless you're replacing that with a universal basic income or something else, which would be incredibly expensive, I think you're playing a game of whack-a-mole by solving one problem and another one popping up elsewhere. And what we really do need to look at much more effectively is pro-natalist policies. It is incredibly expensive to make the decision to have children now. If you don't have the religious and cultural pressures that some people in some migrant communities do have, and you're taking a very rational look at whether or not you can afford a decent quality of life for yourself and children, then people are delaying the age at which they have children or opting out of it altogether. And we just don't offer parents the incentive at all to have children or have more children, 2-child benefit cap being one of them. But of course, most employers still not great on the shared parental leave. I'm an employer and I know the squeeze on our business and our costs and the amount of money coming in versus how much is going out and how much bills are going up. Offering an even more generous maternity package, I have to think about where I take that cost from elsewhere. So it is very rational to choose not to be having children at the moment.
Yeah. And of course, the dark side of the reform stuff we were talking about earlier is that also ties into the debate. It's the unspoken part of this xenophobia is to regress women's rights enough and they can become our chattels again. They'll stay at home and have white babies and everything will be okay. And, no one ever expresses that. But as I said, the arithmetic of it is pretty merciless. There's very little give there. When your policy is zero migration, it is the only logical partner for it.
One sees different stories in different countries, but look, like many policy challenges that I come across a lot in trade, but in other areas of the economy, there's lots of complex parts to it. But I think that what we're badly lacking with aging populations is what are we actually trying to achieve here? I mean, let's assume, for example, that most people would be happy to work, I don't know, between the ages of 21 and 50 full-time, full-on, and then between the ages of, I don't know, 50 and 70, slightly less intensely. But is anybody saying that? How do we envisage a caring profession that will look after our ageing population? At this stage, I'm not entirely sure where we think all the people are going to come from who are going to care for our elderly, unless it's back to treating the women as chattels and that they're supposed to look after the elderly as well. So what I'm saying is there's no actual economic vision here. You see some interesting examples sometimes from the Netherlands or Japan, ideas of multi-generational living, for example, or use of robots. And I'm sure we'll hear more about the use of AI, but it's hard to get away from the fundamentals here of aging populations, people needed to do that caring, that not being the most attractive profession to many people, that being an underpaid profession in many cases, often outsourced and desperately short on resources. You have some fairly major policy challenges in there that doesn't really seem like anybody's quite got to grips with. And until somebody starts talking in serious policy terms, in my view anyway, then you just get the nonsense from reform dominating the airwaves. Yeah. I hear far too much from Labour, occasionally from Conservative, of, well, these people have a point. Well, no, they don't have a point, actually. What we need is to completely reject the kind of populist version of the world and actually say, here's what we're trying to achieve. This is how we're going to try and go about it. Perhaps we'll fail a little, we'll succeed a little, but somehow this is all symptomatic of rather broken politics. You should set up a podcast about it, call it Quiet Riot or something like that.
Can I just ask what everybody thinks? That there's a micro and a macro element to this that always perplexes me. On a UK level, we need more people. That's what we need. Our economy and our old ages depend on it. On a macro level, though, what we've been told by people as eminent as Sir David Attenborough and a whole bunch of other scientists is there are too many humans on the planet, that actually this requirement that we need more people feeds in to a problem that on a global scale is in some ways even more significant with a long-term view. Does anybody have any particular view on that?
There is an argument to be made that we should be sustaining a lower population in total. That curve will be a difficult one to smooth. It will be quite a traumatic one, and it needs money pumped into it, basically. That period when we say, okay, we'll have fewer working age people and an older bit to the population, will need a lot of support from government to make that work. And then the idea is that you settle onto a new equilibrium of a lower population. But like I said, the birth rate does not point to that. It points to a constantly reducing population unless a solution is found. And not only that, but changing the mix of the ages changes a society really quite fundamentally. There are things that are very natural and good aspects of growing older. And there are things that are very useful to society of being young, of having that kind of energy. So a society that is 10 years older in median age, as we will be, is more risk averse, it's less innovative. And if you tip that balance away, then you become quite stagnant as a society. You lack the ideas, you lack a sort of push to experiment.
Quiet Riot. Alex, I wanted to ask you about that clip of Tice and when you posted it, because I noticed that a lot of the comments, or like the most common reply you got, was pointing out that things like this pose a much more serious threat than, say, newly proscribed group Palestine Action. Let's have a quick listen.
My name's Nick. I'm a retired nurse. I work for the NHS for many years. This is the first time that I've ever willingly considered breaking the law in order to stand up for something I believe in.
And why today?
Why today? Because if not today, when?
And are you afraid?
I'm terrified.
So I'd love to know what you all think about the extent to which the Home Office has undermined its authority with what many are seeing as a knee-jerk reaction over Palestine Action.
I don't think it's an apt comparison. I think it's a clunky comparison. And yet, the fact that so many, and I mean so many progressives make it, does show that everyone is in the frame of thinking, I'm not the danger, you're the danger. Everyone is in the frame of thinking, if you say X, I will say Y, which is the exact opposite, and that somehow makes sense. Labour have not covered themselves in glory on this. I reserve judgment on Palestine Action simply because I don't have all the information, apart from a handful of people that see all the intel. No one does, really. And I think it has actually confused the protests about Palestine because it has mixed in the issue of freedom of speech and whether Palestine Action should be a proscribed organization or not, whether the Home Office has too much discretion to determine this stuff, the terror legislation in general. It has sort of mixed all of that stuff into something that's actually not about us or shouldn't be about us. It should be about Palestine.
Yeah.
And so seeing a march of many, many thousands of people who are marching in solidarity and support of the people in Gaza, and the only news line that comes out of it is that some people chose to lift placards that declared their support for Palestine Action and get arrested, then actually it becomes a protest about freedom of speech. The two may be related and both might be very worthy causes, but actually there are ways to protest what is going on in Gaza and show solidarity to Palestinians that do not involve hitching yourself to a particular organization.
I hear what you're saying. I do think it is troublesome that we haven't been told more about what the Palestine Action plans were that met a terrorism threshold. I personally don't think that entering Brize Norton and defacing some planes is terrorism. The real story, of course, being how the hell are our military bases so easily broken into and vandalized in the first place. But of course, that can't ever be the story. And so it's being moved on to them. And obviously, it's all in court at the moment, and the defense will be trying to make the claim that this is not proper use of terrorism legislation. I think prescribing them has led to a waste of police resources, an abuse of people's right to protest, and is a misuse of anti-terrorism legislation, as I understand it. Caveat, I am not a lawyer. I don't really know, but from a kind of interested observer perspective, that's what it looks like to me. But you're dead right, Alex. The problem is that all of this is overshadowing the very real issues facing people in Gaza that are now not getting the coverage that they should, because everyone's talking about whether somebody was wearing a Plasticine Action t-shirt or a Palestine Action t-shirt.
So let me flip that and give you the alternative. What happens if Yvette Cooper has had this advice from the relevant committee to prescribe them under the Act and didn't do it, and then Palestine Action do something? What is the argument we're giving to the other side in terms of two-tier policing, government favoring Palestine over Israel and being anti-Semitic, etc., etc.? Because if they then go out to some other location and cause millions of damage, the question is then on you. Why did you ignore the advice, Yvette Cooper?
I don't disagree with you, Alex, but my point is that the social unrest is coming from the opaqueness about it. If there is evidence beyond throwing some paint on some planes, then I think we need to know it. Even if it's in very loose terms, I think everyone would be far more sympathetic. It's the lack of information that we have had doesn't, in the public's eye, meet the threshold of terrorism.
Which means the legislation needs to change, because the legislation expressly and explicitly gives that discretion to the Home Office, precisely so they don't have to reveal intel that they feel might be sensitive. And I get that. We are now in a different world. We are in a different environment. That kind of governing doesn't work anymore. I am in complete agreement with it. But you are talking about changing the legislation as it is. You're talking about legislation that has built into it that secrecy that we object to.
Or the intelligence isn't there.
Of course. That's also a possibility. But if there are a host of organizations that I know are non-violent, or I can go to the march as an individual, not attaching myself to any particular organization, why would I take the risk of saying, no, I'm going to throw my lot in with this particular organization, even though I don't know whether there is or there isn't intel?
I think what's missing from here is politics needs to be about stories. And if you're going to prescribe this group, what's the story that you're telling, if you're the Home Secretary, that justifies that? Never mind the intelligence. There is a story otherwise, if you don't tell that is building up in large sections of what you may call the progressive left, but I think it goes wider than that suggests that this government is not doing nearly enough with regard to Israel's actions in Gaza, and that this action continues that trend, that this government is profoundly missing the point on Israel-Gaza. That is where this has fallen into, and by not telling a story, the Home Secretary has, in my view, made that worse. So talk to us like we're grown adults, rather than just saying, I've seen intelligence, these people must be banned. I'm afraid that is not working. You said it before. Politics, modern age, demands more than that, and the politicians have to respond. This government has to respond.
Well, people are taking action, whether they're Palestine action or not, but we're going to give you guys, our listeners, a call to action. Alex, what have you got for us?
Citizens' advice. It seems an odd one, but actually it is still the first port of call for many people when battling basically entities that seem giant in comparison to the individual. And that includes being arrested at a protest, or having problems with your immigration status, or pushing against a big corporation that has treated you poorly.
Or your own counsel, if you're being
or your own
evicted,
counsel.
rent
They are a vital resource, because the vast majority of people who need that kind of advice go to citizens' advice bureaus. And you can support them either with money or by donating your time, which is something that I don't think very many people know. So anyone more savvy than the average person, I guess, in anything, not just law, but customer service, because a lot of it is fielding calls from home for a couple of hours a week, or even admin, maintaining a database of complaints and stuff like that. So anyone with any kind of skill can help, and we'll drop a link in the show notes so that if you do have a skill that can help in that area, they don't get funding. They are basically put together by a network of charities, and they are a lifeline to many, many people.
Quiet Riot. Are you feeling more fulfilled now that you're back to work? This Friday.
No. I need a vacation.
See the movie that critics are saying is an awesome,
Look at that.
crowd-pleasing, fist-pumping, all-out brawl of a film.
You're right about that.
They're coming after our family. Go fix this.
Oh, my.
Nobody 2, rated R, only in theaters Friday.
Quiet Riot.
Right then, it's time to strap in for our weekly tour through the culture war battlefield, the land where fictional superheroes, cartoon fish, and the occasional biscuit tin can somehow threaten civilization as we know it. It is, of course, time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
Alex, what eye-roll generating news do you have for us this week?
Oh, Naomi, it's a sad week, because I think this might have to be the last one ever, and I'll have to make it quick, because I don't think we can... I really am quite serious. So, as you mentioned, part of Reform UK's launch on this area of crime and justice was a plan about prisons, and they have roped a former high-ranking prison officer into that, who in their press conference expressed the view that you can't have an absolute proscription of all trans people from jails of a particular sex. An individual risk assessment will have to be made, and there are certain trans people that would be at huge risk if they were put in a male prison. Cue the anti-trans establishment, I guess, calling reform woke. J.K. Rowling calling Farage woke.
What?
Yeah. So Anne Widdecombe wrote a piece to explain why this was necessary, that, if someone has had basically the full transition, they would face a huge risk if you plop them into a male prison, at which point Anne Widdecombe was labelled woke.
Okay.
So, as I said, I don't think we have new heights to scale. I don't think there are any more peaks to be conquered. I mean, I might be proven wrong as I survey the news next week. But this week, I mean, if you had told me 10 years ago that J.K. Rowling would be to the right of Nigel Farage on any given issue, I would have laughed. And yet here we are.
Anne Widdecombe is woke. Well, look, Wokey
As is
Dokey's had a
Nigel
long run.
Farage.
It's had a long run. We've covered many issues over the last year and a bit with Wokey Dokey. It's been good to us, and we now are on the hunt for a new regular feature to include in the show. So this week, listeners, instead of sending us your instances of woke, send us ideas for a replacement regular feature.
Or maybe if you think you can beat that, if you see something that you think is genuinely even more ridiculous, send that in. Keep it going.
QuietRiotPod@gmail.com, open for all your ideas.
The first thing that we would do, the very first thing that we would do, that we do not actually need any very complicated parliamentary processes to do, is to get rid of woke.
Quiet riot. Let's talk trade. The Labour government made much of its ambitions to sign deals previous administrations, from Johnson to Truss to Sunak, failed to get over the line. There's been CPTPP, the India deal, a tariff tussle with Trump, and of course that fabled EU reset, or strategic partnership, as it must now be known. But have any of them yet moved the dial in any meaningful way on our economic fortunes? Has Brexit had any material impact on our non-EU deals? And is our Trump deal actually better than the EU's? We're going to take each in turn to help you get a full understanding, the latest sit-rep, if you like, for who we're dealing with, what the terms are, what's still left on the negotiating table, and when any of it might actually come to economic fruition. So, David, over 45% of UK trade is with the EU, and that rises to 52% when you include countries strongly tied to the single market and customs union, presumably places like Turkey and Switzerland. So how does that number compare to the percentage of trade we do with the likes of India and indeed the USA?
Well, Europe has historically been over 50% of the UK's trade. That was the case before Brexit. That is still the case now, which has defied the belief of those who are pushing for Brexit. By contrast, for example, the Gulf is 3% of UK trade. That's the 6 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. India, 2 to 3% of UK trade. The US is the largest one there. It's typically about 15 to 20% of UK trade. That rather depends on how much you believe the figures for UK services exports to the US, since the UK thinks we're exporting twice as many services to the US as they think they're importing from us, which puts the figure into considerable doubt. But essentially, the US is still a big part of our trade, let's call it 15%, but Europe is still the big player here, and deals with the likes of India. Yes, it is going to be a growing economy likely in the future, but it is only going to deliver a certain amount, and as we might come on to, the trade deal with India is at the moment pretty limited. It could take a long time for it to get into the areas of real UK strength that would make a real difference to our economy.
And then there's the deals that the Tories signed, like New Zealand and Australia. How do they compare?
New Zealand and Australia are not only fairly tiddly trade partners. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but they're really not significant. But so far, there's no evidence in the economic numbers showing any impact whatsoever from those trade deals. They were supposed to, for example, make it easier for UK goods manufacturers to sell to New Zealand and Australia. I don't see any evidence in the numbers of any difference whatsoever in trade. Now, these things do take some years to work through. Realistically, to my mind, the official impact assessment said there was going to be virtually no impact from these trade deals. That's what we're seeing in the numbers. The market's a very long way away. In the case of New Zealand, I actually worked for a company once that tried to sell services into New Zealand and found it just couldn't. It was just too far to go. It's taking 24 hours to travel there and back. So these are never likely to be a large part of our trade numbers, and they certainly aren't at the moment.
David, there was a period when Trump did that deal with von der Leyen where practically every single anchor on every single news channel was asking every single pundit, has Trump actually played a blinder on this? In those precise terms, it was really quite weird. Has he played a blinder on this? Or is slowing down the global economy and plunging your country into self-inflicted recession not a great result?
The idea that Trump has played a blinder came from the fact that the EU did this deal without ever going to the retaliatory action it had been preparing. So the EU had been talking big and saying, we are going to get rid of all the tariffs that Trump has put in place. In other words, we're going to make him reverse because of the strength of the EU. Unfortunately, that was never realistic. Therefore, it left the EU with a problem that whatever they did was going to fail. Now, if you put retaliatory tariffs in place, that harms your own economy. In some ways, you're making goods more expensive. And it's okay if that's bourbon and Harley-Davidson bikes, that's quite symbolic, but there are alternatives to drink, alternative motorbikes. Unfortunately, the US just doesn't export enough goods to the EU that there are that many more easy targets for retaliatory action. And that's why member states in the EU were split on retaliatory action, which is why the EU never took that course. Now, in the end, the EU actually got a fairly reasonable deal compared to everybody else from Trump. And therefore, in some ways, they could congratulate themselves that in the end, it worked out okay, but they made mistakes on the way. But of course, having talked big, everyone then says, well, Trump won. But in fact, Trump is adding cost to the US economy. He's making their own businesses less competitive because their inputs are going to be charged with tariffs 10 or 15%. Stories are now starting to come out about how this is affecting small businesses. Inflation is slowly ticking up in the US. I would expect it to continue to be slow. It's not going to be a sudden hyperinflation. And it's unlikely that the US economy will, in fact, bring back manufacturing because it's all about global supply chains. And in many cases, it's still going to be cheaper to make these things in supply chains across the world and then export the final good to the US. You can't just suddenly change the entire way the world economy has worked for the last 30 years. So ultimately, Trump is almost certainly on any measure of any serious economist going to lose. Question for the EU, does it lose as well because its talk turned out to be empty? Or perhaps did it get away with this because retaliation would have been dangerous and actually it's better to show strength by saying, look, we remain open. We actually don't want to harm our economy in the same way. My view is very much that one, that this is a bit of a warning to the EU that actually the path forward needs to be one of more openness themselves and not going down this the same path as the US. The EU economy has actually been strengthened by trade, and that should continue. And the EU should deepen its partnerships with the likes of the UK, but also with Canada, for example, and create a different vision of the world to that of Trump, and one that looks like it may be more successful.
We're often told by Brexiters that a Brexit freedom is getting a better tariff rate out of Trump than the EU has managed to secure so far. Looking at the numbers as we know them to be, and actually not a huge amount has been published in detail about either, is there any truth to it?
Well, always bearing in mind with Trump that everything may change tomorrow. On the surface, the UK did better than the EU. The UK gets a tariff of 10% from Trump on most things. The EU goods would have to pay 15%. But there's a big caveat here. The UK rate is 10% plus the existing US rate for goods, some of which is lower than 5%, but some of which, cashmere jumpers or certain items of food and drink, is higher than 5%, so 15% in total, whereas the EU's rate is 15% inclusive of those tariffs. So on many goods, therefore, it's actually the EU goods that will pay less. Not only that, but for cars, the UK has a quota at 10% restricted to around 100,000 vehicles a year, which is what we were selling to them. For the EU, it's 15%, but with no quota. So the EU can sell as many cars as it wants and only pay 15%. Now, there will be a depressed amount of demand in general from the US because of these tariffs. It will be harder for exporters to generate these sales. But in general, there's no way that you can say that the UK's deal with the US is definitively any better than that of the EU and the US. And in very detailed studies I've seen, it turns out that some EU countries, depending on exactly what they export, are doing better than the UK. For example, the Netherlands and Ireland, and some are doing slightly worse. For example, France and Germany. So by and large, I'm afraid, once again, we've failed to locate a Brexit benefit.
So what I'm hearing from you, David, is that without question, the EU remains our largest and most important trading partner. And we are in current negotiation with them about trade friction that can be reduced. Post the Starmer VDL summit in May, both economies agreed to pursue fresh arrangements on things like agri-food, access to the Safe Defence Fund, electricity, and a few other bits. So if we call it 50% of UK traders with the EU, for want of a more accurate number, what percentage of that overall trade with the EU is currently being negotiated to improve? Like, how much of the overall deal with the EU is actually actively being renegotiated for the better at the moment?
And sadly, the answer to that is very little. So in terms of agri-food trade between the UK and the EU, and according to figures from the FDF, the Food and Drink Federation, that in total is about 3% of UK trade. That means that the vast majority of UK-EU trade is not in agri-food, it is in industrial products, which is not surprising. And not only that, but the UK has a huge trade deficit in agri-food with the EU, something like 30 billion pounds worth. The EU export far more to us than we export to them. So it will help. It will help. We saw various stories about cheesemakers who had been unable to sell to the EU after Brexit. Shellfish is another one, particularly of interest in Scotland. But these are going to be pretty minor numbers. If you want to tackle the largest part of UK-EU trade, you've got to tackle industrial goods and you've got to tackle services, particularly as, once again, the UK is a services economy. We are now exporting 60% of our exports are services compared to 40% in goods. And we're a very rare economy in having that ratio. Most countries export more in goods than in services.
Well, let's have a quick listen to what Starmer said about Johnson's Brexit deal while he was in opposition on the very subject of us being a service-led economy.
Whatever the Prime Minister says, there's very little protection for our services in this deal. It is a gaping hole. The lack of ambition here is striking. We're primarily a services economy. Services account for 80% of our economic output. So pretending it's a brilliant deal just isn't on. We've got to rely on the bare bones of equivalence arrangements, many of which aren't even in place, that could be unilaterally withdrawn and at short notice. That's the reality of the situation.
David, given his views on the Brexit deal in opposition, where do you think his ambition on services trade with the EU is now?
So, not enough is the simple answer on this government's ambition on services. And to realise why that's the case, we need to understand more about what services sales are. Primarily, they involve the movement of people to go and provide consultancy, people to go and provide maintenance for example, Rolls-Royce engines. So there may be a goods and a services sale together. Or it may be small businesses providing freelance services across Europe. Tours for UK artists, EU students coming to study in the UK. That counts as an export as well. all of those involve the movement of people. And when it comes to the movement of people, we come back to the Home Office again. And the Home Office don't much like letting in too many people, whether it's for business purposes or any other. And if we're struggling to get the Home Office to accept inward movement of people, that means that other countries are less inclined to accept our short-term business visitors. So that's a problem. So we have alighted on this idea of mutual recognition of professional qualifications, because that's something you can do without changing the rules for how many days people can spend working in other countries. If they recognize our professional qualifications, that does make it a little bit easier for certain professions, such as, for example, architects and accountants. But that's a really small part of services trade, once again. Unless you're prepared to look at mobility, you are not going to hit the major market access barrier when it comes to UK-EU trade in services, and that is people need to be able to travel to provide services.
Quiet riot.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
Quiet riot.
Well, one area of mobility that there did seem to be consensus on coming out of the summit was, of course, youth mobility, now rebranded a youth experience scheme, an area of white smoke, if you like, that came from that May summit. Where are we at with that now? Like, what are the blockers? Who in government is responsible for pushing it through? Who in government is resistant? What does business want? What do universities want? Tell us everything. What is the latest situation with youth mobility?
Wow, tell us everything. What a big question on youth mobility. So, the UK and the EU
We don't
have
do
agreed...
things by halves, David. You should know that by now.
I am beginning to realise why you need to have a big break between appearances on Quiet Riot. You're really going into detail on this. So, yes, on youth mobility, the UK and the EU have agreed there will be a youth mobility scheme. This was something the EU and member states such as Germany had been particularly pushing. The UK government had not wanted such a scheme, but had wanted it with individual member states like Germany and France. So we're going to have a UK-EU youth mobility scheme, but there are big differences in what sort of scheme is envisaged between the two sides. For the EU, this will be quite a broad scheme. We'll have potentially large numbers. Individuals from the EU would pay less in student fees than the major overseas rate. Preferably, they would pay the same rate as UK students. And this scheme could, for example, last for 2 years, potentially plus another year. For the UK, the scheme would be heavily limited in terms of numbers, perhaps 60,000 a year from all member states. There may be some linkage into how many UK young people choose to take this up, because there is a thought that fewer UK young people would be interested in youth mobility compared to those from the EU. There is also a concern that UK young people will want to go to countries such as France and Germany, whereas from the EU, it will be from countries such as Bulgaria and Poland. The Home Office is in turn concerned that those young people will then want to stay on in the UK after their time is finished, and it will be difficult to remove them. The Home Office is always concerned that people will stay on after their time is done. The Home Office doesn't, in fact, lead this policy area for strange reasons I don't fully understand. The Foreign Office, in fact, leads UK policy on youth mobility schemes, with Department for Business and Trade in support. The Department for Business and Trade supports youth mobility schemes, but it's maybe not their full priority. And obviously the Cabinet Office leads overall in terms of UK-EU trade relations and negotiations. I'm getting the sense as I talk through this that it's all quite confused, and it's not quite clear where this will land. But if it doesn't land somewhere for which the EU is happy, and they have a mandate from member states to pursue an ambitious scheme, then they will block progress not only on food and drink negotiations, potentially on energy negotiations, but on everything else that has so far not reached the status of formal negotiations. That could be, for example, broader mutual recognition of regulations. And so the reset will be a very slow one indeed. So this is a big policy area for the EU, and one to which I don't fully get the sense the UK government is yet worked out exactly how it's going to handle things, and therefore this could take some time for the UK government in effect to negotiate with itself about what its realistic negotiating position is.
And on this exact point, Naomi, I believe you have put together a call to action for people.
I have, and it's to write to your local newspaper in support of youth mobility, show the Home Secretary just how much support there is for it out there. And I know, like me, some of you will feel aggrieved that you may not be getting back your freedom to roam because you are no longer young enough to qualify for it. But I would say that collective punishment won't restore yours, and opening the door a crack for the young could help restore freedom of movement for everybody later down the line. As this show goes out, it is, of course, A-level results day. There will be thousands of young people across the UK hoping to have a gap year in Europe or to have a year as part of their degree there. There will be young Europeans desperately wanting to come and experience life in Britain. We got to enjoy that, whether or not we took advantage of it or not when we were young. We cannot deny it to younger generations. So we've pulled together at Best of Britain a really neat little website that will tell you exactly how to write to your local paper, where to find their contact details, and there's a template email for you to copy should you so wish. And then the second call to action is make sure you're following David Henig on all platforms. He's omnipresent on them. We'll leave links in the show notes to where you
Or
can
physically, if you see him out and about.
Which is very rare. I'm in my trade bunker most of the time, having to read all of these details, only occasionally escaping from it into the air.
We are grateful that you do it so we don't have to, David. And now it's time to uplift the crestfallen, to inspire the hopeless and rehydrate the desiccated with some good news. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
What have you got for us this week, Kenny?
Well, Alex, you've been revisiting a lot of Aesop's fables on your other podcast, Podacy, listening listeners. And to me, Aesop's always been about the animals. So today, in honour of both you and Aesop, I've dug out a modern-day tale with a moral to it, and a very Aesopian vibe, if I may be so bold.
Very good.
I bring you the tale of the tortoise and the courgette. Once, in the gentle hills of Leicestershire, near the pork pie mecca of Melton Mowbray, there lived a small Herman's tortoise named Matilda. Barely the size of a saucer, Matilda dwelt within a raised wooden garden bed, a modest fortress, if you will, a foot high, surrounded by bean plants and vegetables. Her enclosure was both comfortable for a small tortoise and secure. Or so it seemed. One bright morning in early July, Matilda did something most remarkable. According to her owner, Sally Ann Brooksbank from Wymondham, and I quote Sally Ann here, who said, "She either climbed or just jumped out of her enclosure." I don't know about you, I've never seen a jumping tortoise, not once in my life. I mean, I'm told they can climb a little bit, but jumping, they're not Olympic athletes. They're little shelly, cute things. Now, Sally Ann said, look, she's not very agile. No shit, Sally Ann. But I think she may have climbed up a courgette stalk to get out of the garden. This is a tortoise on a courgette stalk, people. Now, Alex, you do your gardening. You know that courgette stalks aren't that sturdy.
No.
Anyway, Sally Ann continued, she's got tiny claws, and we think she clawed up the stem of the plants. She then headed off in the direction of Sousterne. Matilda's great adventure had begun in earnest, and thus began the most leisurely jailbreak in history at a brisk 0.0041 miles per hour. Matilda inched her way across a quite remarkable 3 miles of countryside.
Wow.
Make for a tortoise. I mean, I'd struggle in this heat to do 3 miles across the countryside.
This is brilliant.
So Sally Ann, has got her own views on her wayward pet's adventures. She said, "We've been trying to work out her route, but it has to have been through several fences, across fields, a ditch, a road, a stream, and who knows what else. A stream. It's a submarine tortoise." Sally Ann maintains that she would definitely have crossed roads and dodged cars. So, for a full month, poor Sally Ann thought that Matilda was lost forever. But wait, last week, a passerby found the tiny fugitive hidden in a field, so well concealed that the young girl who found her nearly trod on her. Now, what would you do if you stumbled upon a wandering tortoise? It's all the big questions on this show.
I'd pop it in the House of Lords.
Well, the House of Lords is not what happened to Matilda, and neither was the vet or the RSPCA, which is what I'd have done. The finder instead stuck Matilda in her T-shirt and took her to a local clothing shop, as you do. Anyway, the shopkeeper, a gentleman by the name of David Henig, was unfazed, and he posted about the unusual visitor on Facebook. In just 4 hours, Sally Ann had heard about the shop's beshelled guest and called up to see if a particular distinguishing mark, which is presumably an SAS crest with "Who Dares Wins" or something on it, was present on the creature. And joy of joys, it was. The shopkeeper said, well, they lived around 3 miles away, so the tortoise had clearly moved like a bloody rocket. And it was a miracle, as Sally Ann said. And
A celebration.
A celebration! Oh, you are on fire. Absolutely on fire. Well, after all, the survival amid foxes, badgers, roads, watery crossings is no small feat for a creature that has small feet and could have been squashed by a car, but wasn't, and seemed perfectly content upon her return to a newly reinforced fortress, it must be said. And so the moral of this fable is not just that tortoises bring happiness, but it's that even the slowest of us can achieve the extraordinary with persistence, ingenuity, and perhaps just a bit of courgette-powered propulsion.
And on that high note, we'll draw this show to a close. David, thank you ever so much for joining the team again.
It has been a pleasure as ever. I've learned so much, mostly about the speed at which tortoises can escape. And if I keep one, I'll bear that in mind.
Well, thank you again, David, and thank you all at home for tuning in as well. Make sure to head over to Ko-fi, to ko-fi.com/QuietRiotPod, and back us for as little as $5 a month. Check out our bookshop and leave us glowing reviews wherever you get your podcasts.
I'll be back on Sunday for a deep dive on the outcome of the Alaska meeting between Trump and Putin with our dear friend Arthur Snell. So until then, keep cool, keep calm, and keep on rioting quietly.
Lots of love from all of us to all of you. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Oh shit, I didn't feel this bit.
This week, nothing happened.
Sorry.
This is your before and after story. Instead of imagining a rewarding career in medical imaging, Southeastern College can actually take you there. Prepare for a career in ultrasound, radiology, and X-ray technology with hands-on specialized training, simulations, and real-life experience with the latest imaging technology. You'll be ready to play a vital role on any healthcare team. Transform your life by helping others. Southeastern College. Your future is bright. Visit scc.edu to get started.